The Christmas Letters, Celebrating Advent with Those Who Told the Story First, by Magrey R. DeVega. Chapter 4, Fully Divine, Peace through Christ, pages 101 through 107. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the one who was first over all creation. Because all things were created by him, both in the heavens and on the earth, the things that are visible and the things that are invisible. Whether they are thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. He existed before all things, and all things are held together in him. He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the one who was firstborn from among the dead, so that he might occupy the first place in everything. Because all the fullness of God was pleased to live in him, and he reconciled all things to himself through him, whether things on earth or in the heavens. He brought peace through the blood of his cross. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20. There's a term in psychology called the reminiscence bump. It's the theory that the music you listened to when you were in your teens and 20s is etched in your memory and stays with you your whole life. During late adolescence and early adulthood, our brain's memory systems are at their most efficient. How's that for sobering news? That means that if you are above the age of 30 or so, remembering lyrics was easier then than now. But more important, it is during that formative period of our lives when our identity and personhood most take shape. So the music we listen to as teens and young adults bears an intrinsic link to critical and memorable events in our personal development. The significant choices we were making, the long-term relationships we were forming, the first glimpses of independence we were experiencing, and the cultural, political, and religious beliefs we were choosing to view the world. So, the reminiscence bump phenomena suggests that when you listen to that music now, you can not only remember the lyrics, you can remember who you were and who you are. It's certainly true for me. Play the theme song to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I can sing every word, picturing myself sitting in front of the television as a youngster. Have me listen to the theme song from Greatest American Hero, and I can sing every word, and I can picture my third grade friend David as we made replica Greatest American Hero action figures out of pipe cleaners and construction paper. If I hear Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," I can picture myself hanging out with my college buddies in our freshman dorm room. And don't get me started on "Never Gonna Give You Up" by Rick Astley. I feel like my young adult years were filled with one Rickroll after another. It is the songs of our youth that stick with us longer than any other. Paul's letter to the Colossians is written to Christians in adolescence. Paul had never visited the city personally, nor had he met the people to whom he was writing. A fellow missionary named Epaphras started that church, so everything Paul knew about the Colossians was secondhand. But he did know this. He knew that the Christians in Colossae were in a formative and vulnerable stage of their faith. They had just become followers of Jesus, and therefore they had just begun to face the pressures and temptations of the culture around them. He knew there were many forces that would veer them away from their commitment to Jesus. So if you read Colossians, which shouldn't take long since it's only 4 chapters long, it reads like a parent giving their adolescent child some advice on how to experience the world for themselves. So, it should be no surprise that in the first chapter of Colossians, Paul teaches them a song. It would be a song that he hoped would stick with them through the adolescence of their faith and provide a kind of reminiscence bump for the rest of their lives. What we find in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20, is apparently one of the earliest Christian hymns sung about Jesus Christ. We don't know how the melody went or how catchy the hook was, but we do know the lyrics. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the one who was first over all creation. Because all things were created by him, both in the heavens and on the earth, the things that are visible and the things that are invisible, whether they are thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. He existed before all things, and all things are held together in him. He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the one who was firstborn from among the dead, so that he might occupy the first place in everything. Because all the fullness of God was pleased to live in him, and he reconciled all things to himself through him, whether things on earth or in the heavens. He brought peace through the blood of his cross. Paul knew this was an important song to embed into the foundation of the early Christians' faith, so that they could carry it with them as they passed the faith down through the generations. And as we look at this song through the lens of Christmas and the incarnation of Jesus, we discover some important aspects of Christian belief and practice that we shouldn't forget either. Let's walk through the song a few lines at a time. The Son is the image of the invisible God. The first century Greco-Roman world was shaped by a polytheistic worldview in which there were multiple gods at work in the function and order of the universe. But like many of the earliest Christians, Paul believed in one true, supreme creator God, rooted in his monotheistic Jewish upbringing. But this first line doesn't stop there. Paul makes a crucial connection between God and Jesus to say that they are one and the same. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. All throughout the Old Testament, God was revealed to the Israelites in very visible ways. In the creation story, God hovered over the waters of chaos and walked in the garden, searching for Adam and Eve. In the Exodus, God was visible through a burning bush, audible through a voice calling out to Moses, and present in the form of a billowing cloud by day and a fiery pillar at night. But by the time we get to the period of the Greeks and Romans, the biblical record changes in the way people experienced God. When Jesus was born, he became the complete and ultimate revelation of God to humanity. In saying that Jesus was the image of the invisible God, Paul was saying that anything and everything we would ever want to know about who God is can be seen in ways that we can most directly relate and understand through a human being, much like us. Consider this truth in light of Matthew's story of the birth of Jesus. His is the only gospel to mention Herod, the king of Judea, an appointee of the Roman Empire. When he heard news of Jesus' birth, he considered it a threat to his throne and a threat to the empire. Even Herod, with all his paranoia and addiction to power, saw Jesus as one who had come with divine power. Fast forward about 400 years after Jesus, the faith of the early Christian church had been centered on Easter and the story of the cross, the crucifixion, and the resurrection of Jesus. Eventually, the church began to take an interest in the nativity story as a way of asserting that Jesus was not only greater than the panoply of Greek-Roman gods, but was also greater than all earthly rulers who had claimed divine authority. That is when the church began to emphasize the nativity stories in the Gospels. The Greeks had claimed that Alexander the Great was born from a human mother impregnated by the Greek god Zeus. But Christians were able to raise them one further, claiming that Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary by an immaculate conception. Romans believed that when Augustus Caesar was born, a star shone bright in the sky. Christians took it one more step to say there wasn't just a bright shining star when Jesus was born. There was also a sky full of singing angels. For the early church, the origin story of Jesus underscored the message of Colossians. Jesus was the image of the invisible God, the definitive Savior of the world and the Lord of the universe. But there's one other aspect to the birth of Jesus that sets him apart from every other origin story of other gods and divine rulers in history. Notice that in the story of the birth of Jesus, every single person who encounters the baby Jesus had their life transformed. Joseph was transformed from someone who felt confused, afraid, and betrayed into someone who put family first and was willing to protect them at all costs. The shepherds were transformed from being average workers into heralds of good news for the world. Zechariah and Elizabeth went from being an aging, disheartened couple to bearing the one who would prepare the way of the Lord. And then there is Mary, who was just an ordinary young girl from an obscure backwater village who simply said yes to God and gave birth to hope for the world. The story of Jesus' birth is not just some divinized birth story of some great earthly power who came from the heavens. It is also a rebirth story of people who were reborn and renewed when they encountered this baby Jesus. It is about how their lives were transformed from hopelessness into hope, from fear into courage, and from darkness into light. The great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart said it more eloquently than I ever could. Christ's birth is always happening, and yet, if it does not occur in me, how could it help me? Everything depends on that. Christmas is not just the story of the birth of Jesus. It can be a story of rebirth for you.